let me read something. It says, this is from the book Psychosynthesis by Robert Ascioli. I guess that's how you say it. Psychosynthesis, the formation or reconstruction of the personality around the new center. And basically what they're saying is that you have a conscious self, but then you have a higher self. That usually we organize ourselves around our conscious self. But then how do you become conscious? When you're a little child and you're starting to think about things, you become conscious of yourself based upon how you are reflected in your environment. So based upon how you're conditioned, that's how you relate to yourself. So then you organize yourself around what you know, right? But that's not your real self. Your real self is your higher self. So what it says is, when the unifying center has been found or created, we are in a position to build around it a new personality, coherent, organized, and unified, which means that once you identify what your true self is, you then reconstruct yourself around this new center, which is all it's talking about is initiation, right? So this is the actual psychosynthesis, which also has several stages. The first essential is to decide the plan of action, to formulate the inner program. We must visualize the purpose to be achieved, that is, the new personality to be developed, and have a clear realization of the various tasks it entails. Then there's various processes you go through to reconstruct yourself. So basically psychosynthesis is the restructuring, the reorganization of yourself around a higher or your higher or spiritual self. So then the question is, have you ever took the time to tune in to what is your higher self? What is your higher ideal self? Many of us have this vision of a higher self, but we don't take it seriously. And so because we don't take it seriously, we can't reconstruct ourselves around that. So that's in a nutshell. If you want more, pick up the book, Psychosynthesis. Next. Okay.
I'll say yin yang.
Okay.
Yin yang is a universal principle where yang stands for the masculine principle and yin is standing for the feminine principle. And together they make a trinity, which is the Tao, the great way. And out of the Tao comes feminine and masculine, and all things in the universe are descend from these two principles. Yin being feminine, receptive, dark, cold, and there's a whole list of things that fit under the yin, and yang being the masculine are things such as fire, heat, light, positive, while yin is negative, but not in a negative way such as what we commonly make negative to mean, but negative in a way that it's just no negative without a positive. It's just a polarity. Without the positive, there's no negative. Without the negative, there's no positive. And together they form the way. It's a Oriental, I should say, derived from the Eastern traditions as China. And they have their sages such as Sun Tzu, or not Sun Tzu, but Lao Tzu, and a few other of their philosophers that describe the Tao in books such as the Tao Te Ching. And that symbol he's drawing there is a symbol of it's called the Yin-Yang symbol, or the Tai Chi, of the Great Way. And the darkness represents the Yin side of the symbol, and the light portion, or the white portion with the dot in the middle, represents the Yang. And what the two dots in each portion, in each side of that symbol means is that within every yin there is the yang, and within every yang there is the yin. Such as within every man there are feminine principles, and then in every woman there are also masculine principles, or yang principles.
Next.
divine hexagram, six-sided object. The union of light polarity, female and male. The union of two triangles, the triangle pointing down representing water or mother, triangle pointing up representing fire or father. The lower and the higher comes together for divine balance. The center being the heart of the relationship or the divine child. Where you get two in one.
Okay. Next. Is that it? Okay.
The Egyptian symbol for
Mm-hmm.
Look of individuation. It was the art of separation or separating out, dividing into parts, dividing into explanation of the actual act.
Where'd you get that from?
The Webster's Dictionary.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Was it? He said it's the actual act of dividing or separating into parts. Individuation. Taking a whole and dividing it into sections.
No. That's the external or the exoteric. See if I can find the direct quote. Okay. This is from an outline of analytical psychology. And it reads, it says, Carl Jung's major contribution to developmental psychology is his concept of individuation. The term refers to a developmental process which begins in the adult individual, usually after the age of 35, and if successful, leads to the discovery of the self and the replacing of the ego by it as the personality center. Individuation is the discovery of and the extended dialogue with the objective psyche, of which the self is the comprehensive expression. It begins with one or more decisive experiences challenging egocentricity and producing an awareness that the ego is subject to a more comprehensive psychic entity. Although the full fruits of the individuation process only appear in the second half of life, the evolving relation between the ego and the objective psyche is a continuous one from birth to death. Boom. And what it's actually talking about is that the individuation process is similar to psychosynthesis, is that the human personality or psyche is made up of many different sections. You have the personality, you got the persona, the outer mask, the ego, you have the personal unconscious, the shadow, you have the unconscious or the collective unconscious. Inside the collective unconscious you have various archetypal symbols, the great mother, the great father, the child, the old wise man, the evil one, the devil, the evil concept. And then you also have the masculine, feminine, anima and animus. And then you have the archetype of the self. And so the process of individuation is for one to become conscious of their unconscious parts and then to bring their unconscious elements together consciously into a harmonious whole. So individuation is for you to really become individuated, to become a unique, distinct entity, as opposed, and to discover who you really are and to become who you really are, as opposed to you being in just what they call a rugged individual, just seeing yourself separate, but in reality, you really are a product of the society. You know, you're being so-called an individual, what you're really doing what society wants you to do, as opposed to you being your unique individual self. That's kind of in a nutshell.
Personal unconsciousness.
the shadow. The personal unconscious is that part of your unconscious that is generated in this life. So from the time that you were born and you start to try to express yourself, and then you become repressed in terms of no, don't do this, don't do that, or whatever. They start, you're stupid, or stop, or whatever, spankings or shakings or isolate, whatever those things may be that cause for you not to want to do that again because it didn't feel good or it hurt. You repress it, and then that repression then goes into your subconscious mind, because you can't destroy it. It just goes there. You don't think about it, but it still is guiding you. That's your personal unconscious. Your collective unconscious is really the accumulated experiences of the whole evolutionary process that still resides down in the collective unconscious. That comes out in various symbolism of dreams or mythologies, and religions actually express those symbolisms, which when we're talking about origin and evolution of religion, we can see that really religion and the symbols of religion are really the expression of the human experience. But now, because we've forgotten, or those experiences have become unconscious, we don't recognize it anymore as what it really is. So now it's been redefined by the church or society or whoever, self-proclaimed prophets or ministers or whatever, your particular, it could be your parents, it could be a teacher who now interprets reality for you, and you accept those definitions.
You have to find out most or all of these different levels of your psyche and then alter them or change them or recognize them?
Recognize them and then reorganize, or what is it I want to say? It's a word that's skipping my mind. I want to say you want to harmonize those various aspects of your personality around your true self. So the idea is to discover who or what is your true self, and then to organize the various aspects of yourself around that. Okay. We're going over time. But do it after this. Okay. You have, really it's like this. You have outer world. Then you have persona. Then you have ego. Then you have personal, unconscious. Then you have collective, unconscious. Within the collective unconscious, you have what they call the anima and animus. You have this whole personal unconscious called the shadow. And also within here, you have various archetypes. Main or key archetype is the self. And you can visualize it like your psyche is like this. I think I've done this before. Ego is here, personal unconscious is here, and collective unconscious is here, and down in the collective unconscious you have the self. You also have anima, animus. The anima animus is, in a male, his conscious mind or his ego is masculine. And so in the unconscious mind is the opposite. So that means his inner self is feminine. That means for a woman, her ego or conscious mind is female, so her inner self is male. Right. And so in dreams, your mind is acting out and having conversations. Characters in your dreams are actually portraying the various elements within your own self. Like the personal unconscious or the shadow are really when you have dreams about villains and things. That stuff is coming out of your personal unconscious. Fears, doubts, things you're afraid of. It's like it's characterized, just like we're talking about here, how religion is characters, same as having your mind. If you go down in your anima, in your collective unconscious, you're having relationships with female characters. Those are aspects of your personality that is communicating or interacting with your ego or your conscious mind. And they're playing out information. And also things dealing with their other archetypes. And I don't want to, this is a whole lecture, I don't want to get into it. If you want to really get into this, I will make copies. I will make copies of this paper, and which will be an introduction to these various concepts. And then if you want to get into it even deeper, a couple of books. These are some basic books. A Primer of Jungian Psychology and Modern Psychology, The Teachings of Carl Jung, are two kind of simple books. And then he has about 30 volumes on religious symbolism, symbols, alchemy, on dreams, on the unconscious mind, on religion and the psyche, and how all this religion is nothing but these archetypes projected into images, and then we take them as being outside of ourselves when in actuality they're inside of ourselves. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. So what else? Mystic marriage. Basically, mystic marriage, I have a symbol of the union between the sun and the moon. And basically, the mystic marriage is an alchemical term, and alchemy is the process of transmuting base metal to gold. Base metal is the lower self. Gold is the higher self, or the spiritual self. So the process of how one transmutes or transforms their lower self into the higher self, or lead into gold. And basically the mystic marriage is the union between the sun and the moon, or the union between the masculine and the feminine, or the union between the yin and the yang, or the union between the fire and the water, or the union between the conscious and the unconscious. We're talking about opposites. Talking about opposites. The union of the two sides. And so it's just, so basically that's what, in a nutshell, that's what it's talking about. And then if you talk about the arm, you talk about the symbol of the masculine, of the feminine, and the masculine. And the unity between the masculine and the feminine produces life. And it's through their unity that you have eternal life. Because anytime one is separated from the other, you no longer have life. One, of course, they have multiple meanings, but essentially it's a unity between feminine and masculine. So then, if you look at all of these various concepts are talking about the same thing. And how we got into this is we were talking about Horus of the two horizons, and it was dealing with birth. Horus made flesh, and Horus made truth. Or the sun made flesh, and the sun made truth. And one was dealing with the physical birth, and the other one dealt with the spiritual birth. And the whole issue of the opposites. And just trying to show how these concepts later, because all of these are different religious and philosophical systems that guide or govern whole civilizations. Right? You got the Hebraic issue, you got the ancient Kemetic issue, you got the Oriental issue, you got modern psychology, you got mysticism. All these things you can look at are inside the major spiritual religious orders. And they all came from the Ankh, or even before, well, yeah, I was going to say even before the Ankh, they came from Horus and Set. Right, it's all the same. You know, that's the thing we're saying, it's all the same. Which is, if you can just, and again, while we went, I tried to, two things, so you can start doing some research and come up with some ideas. It's a two-way communication, but also to see the unity of the concepts. Because when we start today, which we're going to now, is Yes.
Because even the cloud on the virus, it shows he has two crosses, and then he also has the both symbols.
Right. It's all talking about the same thing. The two aspects of life. Being born into the physical and being resurrected into the spiritual. Heaven and earth. And then being a lord or master of the two worlds. Which means mastering the physical and mastering the spiritual. And it talked about being a unifier, wearing the crown of the two kingdoms. Is then being in this state of unity. Right, because they were initiates. And they had went through the initiatory process to become living gods. Which means they had then developed spiritual sight, spiritual capacity. And so that was the whole issue of Uraeus, that the third eye, or the spiritual eye, had become open. Seal of Solomon? In what way? In what way? Is the seal of Solomon, or is that the caduceus? The caduceus. The staff of her, so-called staff of Hermes. The staff with the serpent going up with the two. Yeah, definitely with the spinal column in terms of the energy, raising up the energy to actually illuminate the third eye. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to get into this. I guess the only final thing we wanted to finish up on was the last couple of pages, and then move on into this. Yes, we did. Right. Right.
But I guess we're going to get to it, but I didn't quite understand the Sphinx being used as a image of tunneling through the earth.
Really? Because what direction is the Sphinx facing? You don't know? Did you read your chapter?
12 or 13.
Either one.
Yeah, I read.
Well, it tells you what it is.
I'll read it.
Right back here on 232.
These certain books have different angles of how they, like one of the books I'm reading now about children of the sun, they talk about the Sphinx supposed to be Sphinx of the roof, Horus.
Uh-huh. In what way? Well, yeah, that's the same thing that he's saying here.
And in some other aspect, they say it's supposed to be Kepler.
Yeah, that's the same thing. See, again, all those are types. So Kepler represents what? Kepler's the beetle. Says with resurrection and rebirth out of the orb, right? That came from after, the dung beetle put in the larvae in the ball, and then after the inundation of the Nile came and the water subsided, the beetle came out. Right. And so then what does the Sphinx represent?
He went into several things. He said it represented a male line and a female line. Like on the front end, it was on the eastern end, it was a male line. And on
western end, it was the female line. So you entered through the tunnel from the western end, and you came out on the eastern end. In other words, I guess what I got it to mean is you entered you entered on the female side on the western end where the sun actually set, and you came out on the other side of the eastern side where the horse is born, the child horse is born.
Right. And so then it goes back to how the Sphinx represents Horus.
Right.
The two Horuses. Or the two horizons.
Right.
You know, one where he goes down into Amenta to be resurrected again. Or Horus on the resurrection is the child, and Horus on the east, and Horus on the west is the adult. One represents being born into the physical, and the other one being born into the spiritual, going to the world of the so-called dead, or the world of the spirits. And that can be interpreted from two levels. One level is that you literally, when you die, your spirit then moves out of the physical body. But in terms of the mystery teachings, it also represents where you die and your consciousness dies to the physical and rises to operate in the spiritual, and actually literally communes with the spirit world. Because remember, the true master or the true mystery teacher had developed the capacity to commune with spirits, or had abnormal seership, or had opened their third eye and could now dwell or exist or see, communicate in the spirit world. The world of spirits is the invisible world of energies behind the physical. So you could read auras, you could see into the future, because you were no longer held captive by the physical world. So I can look at you and tell I can see you sick, or you got cancer, or you got heartburn, or you got an ache or pain, because your energy field is going to reflect any disharmonious energy pattern. It's going to be reflected. Your aura is going to reflect your consciousness. So if I understand that darker colors mean the energy is vibrating at a lower frequency, higher colors mean they're vibrating at a higher frequencies, and reds are a certain energy, and yellows are a certain energy, and greens, I can read you, literally, because your energy field is going to reflect your state of consciousness, your state of well-being. I have the capacity then to just tune into you. And by me tuning into you, I actually then will start to get into a resonance with you and can read what's going on with you, like a tuning fork. And so your energy, I start to vibrate at the same frequency as you are vibrating at, and then I pick up. I can read your thoughts. I can pick up on your history. I can start then going back through your life, like a recording, like a tape recorder or a record. So now I have transcended the physical tune, and now I'm operating in the world of spirit. That's why when mediums come in and have, if you've ever been to seances or readings, when you have different mediums bring spirits down, they can tell you all kinds of things, because the spirit is not held by this finite consciousness. So they can see on a different energy pattern and see different things that you need to do or what. Right. And so I'm saying, so the Sphinx is all of that. And again, that was the whole thing we were talking about. It's not just one thing, it's all those things. Because what does it actually start talking about? If you look at on page 231, the second paragraph. It says, when Atum is said to be the Lord of oneness, that is but a way of calling him the one God, the culmination of all powers in one supreme power. All the various gods and goddesses were but representation of various powers, attributes of the one God. So in actuality, all the various attributes you define are the same. Right, just different expression of the same thing. So you can say Horus is the sunrise, Horus is the sunset, Horus is the high noon, Horus is midnight, Horus is spring, summer, and fall. Horus is the rain, Horus is the earth, Horus is the cattle, Horus is the mother, Horus is the father, Horus is the son. Because he's all of those. Well, because our minds have become so conditioned to look at things in a separation, if it's this, it can't be that. That's a European thinking. Their pineal glands are calcified. They cannot see the relationships behind the physical. So then that's where this either-or thing is with them.
Is that so that you don't create compromise?
Is what so you don't create compromise?
Creating an either-or?
Is that no? That's because their pineal gland is calcified, and their physical environment was either-or. It was dark. It wasn't no sun. Right. It was cold. It wasn't no fire. It was no food.
Either you can see it, it's a fact, or you can't see it.
It's not a fact. Because they were literally separated from the sun. The sun was there, but they couldn't see it. And what happened after thousands of years, their personality became conditioned to look at the world and express from that perspective. Life was harsh, life was ugly, life was mean. So what happened? They became ugly, they became harsh, they became mean. Really, we, human beings. And so it's not so much that that's what it is. It's not that it was created to not compromise. That's what it was.
That's why they can't call their own kind, whatever their own kind do, a savage or heathen or barbarian.
That's self-preservation. I mean, you know.
You can look at the news media and they never call Barnes savage.
Of course not. That's
No matter what he did.
right, because they are masters of propaganda. They understand the power of ideas or thought forms. They understand that. So they don't say so, even though they know that it is true, you won't get them to say it. Because they know if they don't never say it, they can still create doubt in your mind. Yeah, right. But that's another thing. Anyway, so what I was trying to show you that is right here. He's talking about the dung beetle as he talks about the Sphinx of Kepra, the transformer. At the bottom of the paragraph, it says, we learn from the ritual that the mystery of the Sphinx originated with the mound of earth as the passage or place of passage of burial and rebirth for the solar god. The style of Tatmus informs us that the Sphinx was built to commemorate the sacred place of creation, of the first time of a new creation. The fact is that the Sphinx was carved out of the rock at the exact center of the earth as a lasting witness to that sacred place of creation or beginning, which goes back to the place, the domain of Set, and to the days of the masters of Ker, or the figure of the primitive abyss or void. The perfect type is thus represented as dual, as the lion and the lioness combined, as the forepart, the head, has been rendered anthropomorphically in the likeness of the pharaoh who was the lion ruler at the time. The great Sphinx as keeper of the secrets is couched in repose upon the horizon of the eastern equinox, when the gate of the fair exit was in the lion sign, and the gate of fair entrance was in Aquarius, the water sign that is figured over the abyss of source on the celestial pole or globe.
Okay,
Oh, I know.
exit,
Right. What are they saying? See, you got to read and not read, you got to study your material. Look at this. You see this, you got to take notes in the margins. You got to pull out key words. Because if you go through it and pull out those key words, if you took all those key words and put them on one piece of paper, you'd get the point. Anyway, the point I'm saying is, if the whole, what is the entrance? If we're talking about an equinox, right? If you're talking about the eastern and the western horizons, what are you talking about? Entrance and exit. Entrance and exit. So just in your mind, look at the earth. This is so important because all this stuff is visual. It's all visual. If you don't, that's why I told you, go out sometime and watch the sun. Watch the sun at sunrise, watch the sun at high noon, watch the sun at sunset. So that when you start talking about pattern, your mind has experienced it consciously. You've experienced it because you are in it every day, but you haven't reflected on it. So the pattern ain't burnt in your conscious mind. It's in your unconscious mind. Goes right back to the whole issue of psychosynthesis, individuation, to make what is unconscious conscious. You as a human being has went through all this. How old are you? Yes, you. So for 43 years, you've experienced the sun rising and setting every day. But you ain't really paid attention to it. So now the point I'm saying is, so if you're talking about the earth, the rise and the set, okay? Now, what are you looking at? So if you're saying, I'm looking at light, right? When the sun comes up, it gets light. When the sun goes down, it gets dark, right? What was the first two heroes in the whole mythos? Who were the first two heroes? Set and Horus. What do they represent? Day and night. So the first phenomena that human mind registered was day and night for hundreds of thousands of years. Day and night, day and night. I can see in the day, I can't see at night. Okay? So now, they're saying, so the sun, we're talking about solar cult, the sun is entering where? What does it look like? If it's going down, right. It looks like, it looks to you, if you look at it, watch the sunset, what does it look like it's doing? It looks like it's going down in the sun, right? So, it's entering, entrance. And then on the other side, when the sun comes up, what does that look like? It's coming up out of what it went down into. It's exiting. The entrance and the exit. The worm concept was that they saw it go down and they saw it come up. So then when it went down, it must crawl across to the other side and came up. As a concept. Now, they didn't say they literally crawl across, but in their concept, in terms of explaining the perception, it crawled across. It crawled across the earth. So if it crawled across the earth, for me to crawl across the earth, what has to be there? A tunnel. Well, what do we know that tunnels through the earth? Worms. So it was a type. So it's like language, like vocabulary. All these various symbols are vocabulary words. And then later, as they start building a bigger vocabulary, they start mixing them up and just talking about stuff with them. So if you don't know what a vocabulary, you ain't gonna know what the heck they're talking about. And so that's what, all we're doing is tracing the development of vocabulary. Oh, and the Sphinx, right? When we talk about the Sphinx, we're talking about the two sides of the Sphinx. The Sphinx represents this process of going down and being reborn. Because this is a Sphinx out front of the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
That actually represented a chamber, or they said it was supposed to be some subterranean.
Well, they say it's not.
Who knows?
Last I heard that there was something under it, I thought.
Right.
They hadn't really gone down there yet.
But then even beyond that, in terms of the measurement of what is actually measuring, defining, or orientating you to, if you understand what it's aligned with. So, anyway, so also, so that's what it's talking about here. So when it's talking about the, where was it at? Blah, 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 blah. And a number of other issues. It talked about it sitting in a state of repose. It means, remember we talked about the whole issue of meditation? and reaching a state of balance or harmony or being in repose. You know, all these things are giving you keys. Yes, sir.
It says, fair exit, fair entrance was in Aquarius and fair exit in the sign of the lion, right?
Right.
Meaning the equinox,
Right.
right? But the equinox is going in August and February.
They're talking about stellar, not tropical. They're talking about the precession of the equinoxes. Because every 25,000 years, right, every 2,180 years, a different sign is at the equinoxes. So this is giving you a clue to when possibly the Sphinx was constructed during the age of Leo. Anyway. Okay. Hmm? What do you mean, which Leo? Which age of Leo? I don't know. Probably the last, within the last, but I don't know.
Going to Aquarius. Now we're in Pisces. Before that was Taurus, was
Aries.
it? Aries.
It goes back.
How many
So
back is Leo?
it's every 2,160 years, roughly. So you just round out for 2,000 years. So you got Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. 6, because Aquarius is the other half, the opposite. So 6 signs, that's 12,000 years. Okay. Which is saying a whole other thing in terms of us going to the age of Aquarius.
Size.
Right, because it says the gate of fair entrance was in Aquarius, the water sign that is figured over the abyss of source on the celestial globe. And so, that's what else? We kind of went over the rest of the stuff in general. We're moving on. We can't stay here. You got to read the rest for yourself. If you have some questions, bring them forward. We'll go over them. Well, let's just take this piece right here on page 235. It says, okay, start on page 234. We're talking about Horus, the child in one equinox, who was Horus, the adult in the other, constitute the double Harmachis, one as the founder and the other as the fulfiller, one as Horus of the incarnation, the other as Horus of the resurrection. You need to understand what they're saying. Incarnation, resurrection, right? Child, adult, founder, fulfiller. The doctrine was solar symbolically at first, but next it was eschatological. 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 And what's eschatological? Yeah, I'm just seeing if you remember. Because we're raising these terms, and we talked about them, and so I'm thinking you remember them, but then we ask the question, you don't know what I'm talking about.
With the end time, with the afterlife.
With the end time, yeah, right. It really moved it. Eschatology deals with the mystical. The mythological constantly dealt with the physical phenomena. But then as we became more and more sophisticated, we began to understand how that external phenomena also express itself in terms of the resurrection of our own divine soul, the spirit. Remember how I was talking about how the culmination of the 7 elements are culminated in the blood the soul of the living human that now became divine, where prior to that the human wasn't seen as a divine. The elemental forces were seen as the divine forces. And as we then grew, we start to understand that those elemental principles or characteristics actually were the foundations for that culminate in humans. And that humans then became the offspring or the culmination of the elemental forces. And thusly then within us became the synthesis of the elemental powers of the universe. And then that was then held within the immortal or divine soul.
What did they observe in nature to help them reach that conclusion?
Is what they observed first in nature that was then also reflected in their own states of consciousness. See, as the various masters or mystery teachers studying the external world start to go through the process themselves, they saw that it was the same thing occurring in terms of being born in the flesh and then being resurrected into spirit. They then were born in the flesh as children and then became mature as spiritual visionaries, that they could literally see spiritually and commune with the spirit world. They became the living truth. They became the living truth. And so by becoming the living truth, they became witness to the immortal power. You understand what I'm saying?
No. I mean, I understand what you're saying intellectually, but I'm not grasping it. You know what I'm saying?
After seeing, it's like after repeating seeing the same phenomenon over and over and over and over again, you start to put pieces together.
No.
No?
As you experience the phenomenon, you became the living truth. The masters literally became the living truth. They became co-creators. They could literally control the elements. Literally. Yes, sir.
Is that what the maid was saying in the ritual when he said master of truth ascending in form?
Right.
You know, I am the archive,
Right.
on to the dark side.
Right. That you have embodied those, and now you can literally leave your body at will and fly like an eagle. You can transform yourself like Kepra. You have transformed yourself like Kepra and been reborn or resurrected into a spiritual being. You're the embodiment of all those elements. You can be fire. You can be water. You can be air. You can be earth. Literally. Now, you don't just go turn to water, but you can control various elemental powers through the act of your spiritual consciousness now. Your will has become merged with the divine part of yourself, the true self, which is divine, which goes back to what? Magic. Right. Right, and because they literally experienced it, they became a witness to it.
Again, it's easier to understand the experiences way back at the beginning, you know?
Yes.
You know, transport your mind back to having nothing and you don't need the whole, just the very basic thoughts of survival and then how you evolve on that.
Right.
But over time, as we've gone through all these different phases,
Right.
and thinking has evolved, you know,
Right.
it's harder to keep track of the experiences that they had that helped them reach that next level.
Right.
So, and maybe I'll try to do this, to try and go back through here and just write the steps in stone to each new level, you know, because it's hard for me to
Comprehend all these various aspects. And why? Because you are a child in the process. And we all start off as children in the process, and through consistency over time, we evolve And it's nothing you can really do about it but be consistent with it. Because in one sense, a part of you understands it, but your conscious mind can't decipher all of it. You sense what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, but your conscious mind hasn't developed the experience with it to be able to articulate it. And that's just part of the process. The only reason I can do that is because I've been studying stuff since 1971. Formally, and even before that, I was tripping off of and didn't know what I was tripping off of until I came into, Aquarian Spiritual Center and saw that I wasn't crazy and that I wasn't crazy. I mean, it's just real, And there's so many of us that be tripping off of it, but because we have no reference point, we don't know what we're tripping off of.
That basically everybody else said about physical and metaphysical, where whites look at it as just physical. You look at it, some people look at it as metaphysical. You can breathe there, but it's there, but you blow your breath on something, and you know it's there, but you can't physically touch it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in terms of how, where I interpret what you're saying is how black people, one of our limitations in this environment is because we are in contact with this other reality that we can then settle. Because you can look at brothers who go down the street with a boom box, and physically they don't have too much of nothing. But spiritually, they're on a cool vibe. I mean, they just out there rocking and rolling, and at that moment in time, they're having a spiritual experience to a certain degree. It's just out of context, with the physical reality, which has become is a limitation because the powers that be have now governed this world based upon this material orientation. That's why a lot of African countries, the people are not running to become so-called modern, because in their traditional life, they're living a very spiritual life. And it's cool. They ain't got to have all this stuff because they're actually communing with higher forces of nature. And they're really having a very divine experience. But because now we have this kind of demonic force over the globe that is now going out and destroying, there's a responsibility now for the humans to have to rise to the occasion. Idealistically, really in the real world, African Americans are really that entity that needs to coalesce itself to go out and preserve and be the saviors, right, and allow for our culture to grow organically as opposed to this forced thing.
I know the white folks do a lot of lying. I just got out of I have to bring it to their attention. I got out of class in management, and I asked one of the guys from VIP from Apple Computer, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you mean by technology? I told him, well, my parents are from Louisiana, so I can go out in the swamp, I can find a Model T, and I know it's a Model T. But you say old technology, new technology is better than old technology. Yet I can put a new car subjectively the same conditions, and I'll never know what type of car that was.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you explain new technology better than old technology when there's no building that you could have designed to withstand time and experience?
Mm-hmm.
They've been rocking and rolling for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Then you told me, well, that's bad for the time building. Never answered the question, said it was bad for the economy.
That's their orientation. That is their total orientation. It's a capitalist system. That's the fundamental thing. Is understanding what is the frame of reference. It's a capitalist system. And a capitalist system is a system that was constructed by the haves to perpetuate their power over the have-nots. And it goes all the way back to pre-colonial black Africa and the basic orientation of the European clans.
Is that another name for slave, servant?
Right. Right. But anyway, you had a question, then we need to move forward here. We'll be here till 9:88.
When you were talking about
inner self is feminine?
I still don't quite follow that. I understand because I've heard you mention this before,
Sure.
but I never really got a real good understanding of
The fundamental principle is everything in creation, everything in the created world is polarity. It's based upon polarity. So then if your outer self, and then this is also, if you get into a lot, the depth psychology, analytical psychology, through the research, they define how the inner self or the unconscious mind is the opposite of the conscious mind. Right? Conscious and unconscious are opposites. Okay. Male's conscious self-concept is male. Okay? So his opposite side is female. Now, the unconscious, and I might take it up, the unconscious mind is known through projection. What does that mean? That means that the male will project his sense of female out. And when he encounters females that matches his sense of the feminine, he becomes attracted to those entities. Now, in his mind, he's attracted to this woman. But in actuality, he is embracing his self. Now, not literally, but the characteristics, because in this society, we don't have, the society hasn't generated the behaviors that allow you to express your femininity. Well, in the African society, they had dances and things that where men imitated women and where women imitated men. We had rituals and ceremonies where men went in and expressed the feminine aspect of it. Just like the Dogon. The Dogon and deal with Amma, the great provider, they're in a feminine modality. They're still masculine as men. They ain't homosexuals, but they're allowed to express and experience the feminine. So they're whole. Now, Fritz Wilson, well, you know, in one sense you could say yeah, but in another sense, no. In terms of right. See, reference point. But in another sense, yeah. But the way it's interpreted and the way the world deal with it is in a perverted way. But in actuality, yeah, because in every man there's a female, and every female there's a man. And because the society doesn't cultivate the capacity for you to be that way, then usually women then become attracted to males that reflect how they think about masculinity. And through in a relationship with that male, they then are expressing or acting out their masculinity. And the same is true for a male.
So you look to basically, what you're saying is that your inner self looks for a mate that will reflect what's inside it.
Right.
In other words, act out and outwardly, externally what's inside
Right.
your inner
Right.
self.
And that's a simplified expression. There are all kinds of variations and deviations in terms of however, and we're getting off the way on. However, like as a child, right, as a child. Because see, the female and the male are archetypes. They're prime symbols, really they're psychic energies, right? And we need to, I'll bring some of these, because we need to do a whole lecture on this thing here, because it's very critical for us to really understand these various components. And so anyway, I'm going to stop there. Just deal with that, because we need to get into chapter 13. You know, because again, we'll be here forever. Although time is illusion, so you know. So anyway, chapter 13, the mystery of Tim and Tum, of Atum Au and Atum Ra. Again, look at these terms. Because the Au, or IU, and the Ra, see, you need to, because later on you're just going to see those words separated from the Atum. So you need to know what aspects of the life force, the solar power they represent, right? This is a good part because he goes through a summary, and so we'll finish up with this piece for today. And I'm telling you, the next 2 weeks we're going to do an accelerated thing because, anyway, we'll try. So it says, The mystery of Tim, T-M, and T-U-M, or Atum Au, Atum Ra, and a later evolution of the same under the name of Har Maku and the double equinox, was known to St. Paul, who was a master of the secret wisdom. You understand what he's saying? No. Okay. Is right. Right. Initiate of the secret wisdom. Yes. Yes. The doctrine concerning Tum or Atum Harmachis is well stated by him, only has been rendered as metaphrastic. Meta, beyond, phrastic. I guess that's phrases, right? That means he's put it in metaphysical terms. The two atoms, or atom and nepheratum, were replaced, here it is, by the first and second Adam, as the man of earth and as the man from heaven. The man of earth and the man from heaven. The second Adam was he who is our peace, with the title of Au in Hotep. This, as the second Horus, was he who made both one. Look at what's being said here. And broke down the middle wall of partition. What are they talking about? There it is. Listen to what he's saying. The man of earth and the man from heaven, right? Higher self, lower self. It goes back to the whole issue of exit on the eastern, entrance in the western, right? Birth in the child, in the physical incarnation, birth as the adult, and spiritual resurrection. Earth, heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. It says here, he who is our peace. That means things have now become calm or at peace. There's no more turmoil or conflict between the two realities. They have now become harmonized or at one, at peace, at one. With the title of Au in Hetep, this as the second Horus was he who made both one. So the second Horus, which is Atum or Tum or Atum Ra, the adult or the father, makes both one. They unify the two. And broke down the middle wall of partition, that he might create in himself of the twain one new man. Unite the two. So when they sit up and wear the double crown of the two kingdoms, what are they really talking about? In actuality, then that reality became the governing factor for the administration of Kemet, because Kemet was a reflection of the stellar cosmos, and they operated the kingdom as a reflection of the divine order. And so all the various attributes of the Pharaoh were attributes that were given to the Great One. They usually literally call him the Great One. But again, once we start to understand the dialogue, we really understand what they're talking about. The middle wall of partition is a figure in the eschatology of that which is a fact in the equinoctial mythos. Okay? The wall is a separation between the two.
So, is that the bound? Or, you know, I don't know. I mean, what is it that they're referring to?
The separation between heaven and earth. In one sense, yeah, it could be shooting.
What about the fire cells?
All that. It's all of that.
So that wall was broken down and the two merged.
There you go.
What you're
Absolutely.
The same symbolism was used again.
Absolutely.
Soft,
Absolutely. So then you also can see as these people migrate to different continents, the concepts were just articulated in different languages. So you see the same, well, we had the same principle when we talked about all these various concepts, which goes back to Stolen Legacy, when he said that the temple, the great Grand Lodge resided in Kemet, and there were sub-lodges on all the continents. That's why you can see the same mythos reflecting all the various mythologies, the various religions. Boom. Okay, so he said the doctrine of the incarnation and the resurrection, brought on from the stellar, was established in the solar cult under the phrase of fatherhood, the Horus of the double equinox. So here you also can get some confusion because they, in one sense, say Horus as the son, who is also the father. So then you get into Christ's mythos, right? Me and the Father are one. Right. But because our minds are operating based upon a partition, we can't see the simultaneity, right? Two things being true in the one thing at the same time. Which is back to the Tao, the unity of the opposites. And in the Tao, remember they had the dark side with the white dot and the light side with the dark dot. That even though one was female and one was male, simultaneously the female is in the male and the male is in the female. So Horus, the child of one equinox, who was Horus the adult in the other, constituted the double Harmachis, which is also named for the Sphinx. What? Harmachis? Okay. Correct me when I'm wrong. Harmachis. One as the founder and one as the fulfiller. One as Horus of the incarnation and the other as Horus of the resurrection. So the resurrection is the fulfillment, the word made true. The incarnation is the founding or the word made flesh. Now, we'll finish up with this piece here. He says, we have seen the different portrayals and phases which were evolved of Horus as God, the double horizon or the double equinox. Firstly, it was Horus as Horus Behutet. So he's taking us back, right, in the hero cult. It was Horus as Horus Behutet, god of the axe, god of the hut or winged disc, when he crossed first from the horizon south to the horizon north. Secondly, from the horizon west to the horizon east on the vulture's wings or on the wings of the hawk. Another imagery was Horus as the Aten. Secondly, he crosses the horizon west to the horizon east as a crocodile or great fish, Sebek Horus, who swims the waters of space around about the earth, on the outside of the earth, through the noon. Thirdly, in the lunar cult, he passes his passage from west to east through the cow of earth, imaged as the cow Mi'ur, an image of the mound of earth. You have to go back and look at the equivalence. He's telling you the equivalence. And if you can't start seeing the equivalence, you get confused. But once you start seeing the equivalence, you can decipher what they're talking about. Fourthly, as Tim, he makes his passage through the underworld from the one horizon west to the other east, typified by the sun sinking down in the abyss in the west and rising again in the eastern horizon. Fifthly, as Atum, as a worm, he made the crossing through the earth. Sixthly, the Sphinx was an image created by man, symbolical of the mound of earth, for the passage of Horus as Harmaku or Atum Harmachis, for crossing from the western to the eastern horizon through the body of the Sphinx. concept and representation of the sun as a worm passing through the earth from west to east is proved in the 87th chapter of the ritual when it says, I am Seta, earthworm, at the confines of the earth. I lay myself down in the evening in the west. I restore myself and I renew myself daily. Blah, 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 blah. On and on and on. Down at the bottom it says, the worm working its way through the earth would leave a hollow track. The hieroglyphic sign for the earth is a hollow tube, a reed, and it is always used as a determinative of the divine name said in the pyramid text. We're talking about types becoming images that become vocabulary. He talks about on the 240, a tunnel extends through the earth from the place of sunset to the place of sunrise. Each end has a sphinx-like form, and it is thus through the sphinx that the passage was at this time made. At one end is written fair entrance, at the other end fair exit, etc. He talks about how this image was carried to America, and he shows a figure in plate, what is that, 68, etc. Now follows another creation or phase. Check it out. Another creation is also a phase. So different phases were different creations. Or a different phase of the solar cult, which was called the cult of Ptah, who with 7 assistants formed Amenta. It's interesting because Amen is hidden Ta land. Amenta is the hidden land, which lasted about 9,000 years. So the 8 great gods of Amkamen of the stellar and lunar cults were followed by the Put cycle, or Enad, of the 9. The word Put denotes the number 9, hence Ptah or Ptah, who was added to the earlier 8 great gods as the 9th. So Ptah is related to the 9 powers, the 9 elements, or 9 qualities. Ptah with his 7 Ali co-workers tunneled through the mound of earth to form Amenta, and one of his names was the Opener. This formed a group of divinized elemental powers. So remember it talked about how Ptah was the one that opened the mouth. And then the mouth, out of the mouth comes the Word. And it is the Word made flesh and the Word made truth. And then if you understand that the Ptah was the Lord of Amenta, and Amenta was going down into the earth, which is the western horizon, which is the horizon where you die to the physical and are born in the spiritual, then Ptah opens the mouth for the word to be made true, or the mysteries to be spoken, which means that one now has spiritual understanding or spiritual sight. I see some puzzlement on your face. See, the key thing is this, that was in last week's, that was in the chapter 12. But in chapter 12, it talks about the Word made flesh. The Word made flesh is the incarnation, right? Because the Word is God, or the Word is the power of life. So the Word made flesh is when the life force, it becomes material. So when when the Word, the power of life, incarnated, it became flesh. You are the power of life animated, right? Your flesh is flesh. Then the Word made truth, because the truth of life is for life to evolve to its highest capacity, its spiritual side, not the physical side. To be resurrected. The death is a resurrection. Death to the physical, to be reborn in the spiritual. So the Word made truth is when you become true to your true nature, and your true nature is spirit. So once you move to operate in the spiritual world, you no longer die, because you now operate from spiritual consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, or soul consciousness, or spiritual consciousness, etc., 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 God consciousness. And that's the resurrection. when Jesus was resurrected as the Christ. Christ is another word for light, the anointed one. Now you operate in terms of spiritual consciousness. You died on the cross. The cross represents matter, the physical. So you died to the physical to be reborn in the spiritual. So the word made truth. So I said that to say that if then the word, I'm following the logic. The word made truth was the adult phase of Horus, right? The word made flesh is the birth. Horus as a child on the east. Horus as Atumra on the west is dying to the physical to be resurrected in the spiritual, which is the word made truth. So now Ptah is Lord of the underworld, then Ptah rules the world of the spirit, the spiritual world. And so then if Ptah opened the mouth of the Manus, or the soul, or the man, in Ptah rules the underworld, the spiritual world, he opened the mouth. The mouth is what you speak with, but the speaking is not the spoken like I just talked. The spoken word is when you walk or talk, or what you do is the spoken word. Right. It's the animation. It's, right?
It's born into flesh. When you
Right.
open your mouth and the truth comes out, it's born into flesh. You bring it in from the spirit world into the physical.
Right, but the word made truth is you're the word made flesh. Now, your behaviors reflect your level. Once your behaviors equal spiritual consciousness, you become the word made truth. Because now you function from what? Truth. You stand on my eye.
Can you kind of phrase that in the Midnight theology that because I can understand that a little clearer.
Can I phrase it in the Memphite theology?
Or base it on
No.
what we've learned.
Because Memphite theology is only a creation story. It's just a story of creation.
Because you're seeing the word made
True.
true.
But see, now I would have to go, because what are the last four gods in the Memphite theology? Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys. They're the last two pairs. So now Osiris is a later expression of Amen, who's a later expression of Atum-Ra, which is the expression of the Ptah concept. So what I'm saying is, see, Memphite theology is a certain evolution. Anyway, I'm confused. I may be confusing you more than I'm clarifying. So all I'm saying is the Memphite theology is a story of creation. Now we're talking about resurrection. So then you have to go into the mythology around the death, the fragmentation or chopping up of Osiris, the bringing back of Osiris, and the birth of Horus is the mythology of resurrection. So there are two stories: creation and resurrection.
Out to us later that the whole, Horus being chopped up, dismembered.
Osiris.
Osiris being dismembered is actually, there's a lot of, it's this story, it's the whole resurrection story.
Right.
But there's a lot of symbolism there that has been carried forward.
Right.
Through the folk.
Right. Okay. So I got off on all that trying to talk about, what I started doing is, well, personally what started happening is seeing how the mythology of Ptah being the opener of the mouth, what it really is talking about. I was always like, he's got this steel instrument. He's opening up people's mouths. You know, what's that mean? But then when you go back and look at the origins of the different symbolism, now you can see, well, you can see clearly what they're really talking about. Anyway, that's how we got there. So, on here, because he talked about one of his names of Ptah was the opener. So one of them actually dealt with Ptah being Lord of the underworld, and he actually been opening up a passageway from the west to the east. It also talks about the resurrection or the rebirth. In the mythology, and then in the mystical or the eschatology, is actually talking about that those principles open up the resurrection in you, where you then start to be the truth. It says the foundation of the fatherhood was laid by combining the 8 powers or spirits to the one, to be combined into one single deity, to be worshipped as the one true and eternal spirit. The 8 were primarily the Great Mother and her 7 elemental spirits. Now the goddess was superseded by Ptah, and both sexes were included in the one supreme being who is now Lord over all. So basically what they're showing you is how the mythology, as we evolve, was just carried on and repackaged. Skip a lot of stuff, move on. On the next page, 241. It says, thus Ptah or Atum presents a form of the same duality, which is the same as the Australian man with a vulva. Now if you go back to totemic society, he talked about how in initiations of the Aboriginal people, in some of the ancient ceremonies, when a young boy went through rites of passage and they went through circumcision, they also would cut out a small notch in the penis to represent a vulva, where then he became both male and female. Or the concept of the male and femaleness. Because the original ceremonies were based upon the female as the creator, as the foundation. So the male's ceremonies actually evolved from duplicating or copying the females. And because the Great Mother of female image was the foundation, to become whole, one had to embrace the feminine side. So anyway, he was just referring to that. He says, who in his primitive way was a twofold figure of the All-One. In the Egyptian Genesis, created man is Tum. Later, Atum or Amen, the original of the first man, Adam. So let's give you some clues. Tum, Atum, Amen, and Adam are all synonyms of the same concept. Atum was the son of the creator Ptah, the earliest Bayun or Bayun parent that was divinized. The 7 primordial powers had been previously recognized in nature as the offspring of the mother. 6 of these were pre-human powers or souls developed from the external elements. The 7th was the earliest human soul, born of the blood mother. This was the blind, imperfect soul in matter that was imaged in child Horus, Anarif. The soul of all the 7 was matriarchal. They were the children of the mother only. 2 other powers were added to make up the total in the Put cycle. The double primitive essence had been assigned to Ptah. Doctrinally, this was a soul of blood derived from the maternal source in combination with the spirit of the male. Hence came the human soul that was constituted in 2 halves, the soul in matter and the soul in spirit. And the biunity was first personified in Ptah as the mother and father in one divinity. And as the Bayun parent, Ptah gave birth to man, or created his son Atum. In the text from Memphis, the goddess called Ptah of the earth, the mother giving birth to Atum. Here, Atum, Adam, has a mother, an item which is omitted from the Hebrew version. Are you following what they're talking about? Doing good. This is heavy because when I was looking at this, there's a piece, and hopefully I remember to bring it. It comes, Swallow Lubick did a chart. I think he has a book called, one of his, he had this guy who would try to become his disciple or his student, and he wrote a book on his experience called Alchemy, Alkemi. And in that book, he has a couple of diagrams. And one of these diagrams, he shows how the human senses evolved out of unity, and then you had duality, polarity, male, female, positive, negative, hot and cold, day and night. And then from the polarity came the Trinity. And from the Trinity, which he identified as, in the alchemical process, of sulfur, mercury, and salt, as three attributes. And I need to get clarity on something like earth, fire, and another element, which is really the three qualities of cardinal, fixed, and mutable, or action, reaction, and synthesis, the dialectical process that then generated the four elements of fire, earth, air, and water. And the combinations of fire, earth, air, and water generated taste, smell, hearing, touch, sight, which became the attributes for human consciousness. So literally what I'm saying is that humans are the outgrowth of the elements. The elemental powers generated human life. This book, I'll try to remember the author, but you just go to Boulder Tree and get Alchemy, they have it. Now the book itself, it has the tidbits and stuff in there, but those charts are critical pieces. And then if you go into the book, The Egyptian Miracle, he actually goes into breaking those concepts down to the numerical, energetic properties of that. So anyway, the point I'm bringing is really, like God always says, you have to bring something to the knowledge to understand the knowledge. That's why you got to do some comparative studies, because that's how it gets clarified for you. Because you can then understand it even more profoundly by bringing these other facts to it. So if you just look at it on your own, it might be like, yeah, I can relate to that, but I don't really understand it. So we can relate to a lot of things, but we don't really understand them. Unless you understand them, you can't really apply it. You just can have the information. You might even go around talking about it, but it really won't change nothing. All right. This is a profound concept that we're talking about here. In that, hence came the human soul that was constituted in two halves. So it's